Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, Ingenious Thinkers, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. My name is Ken Tencer, curator of Say Hi to the Future, helping leaders think differently in the face of uncertainty and ambiguity. Better thinking, better outcomes. With me today is Samantha Rush, who helps organizations, teams, and individuals build decisive cultures, unravel complexity, and facilitate great decision-making. Samantha Rush, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Thank you for having me. It's an absolute honor to be here.
So Samantha, you are working on a PhD in decision-making.
I am, yeah.
How did you make that decision?
It was actually something that I've been thinking about for quite some time before I started. So I worked in lots of organizations doing lots of things. But certainly the organization that I was working with at the time that I was doing my MBA, there was a few projects that I was working on. And I think when you're doing my MBA, you do a lot of group work. And I found that the process of making decisions as a group was a lot harder than it had to be. And so then it was about the same time I started to do some work with the broader intelligence community within Australia. So I was working in business intelligence at the time. So I started working with people doing intelligence in other kinds of organizations. So in government organizations, whether it be defense, it might be the tax office, it might be the secret squirrel office. And so I started to get exposure to some of the tools and techniques and questioning and debiasing techniques that the intelligence field uses. And when I had a look at these, and then I compared that with my experience in the business world, and I just thought, wow, if we'd have had these techniques back when I did that project, I probably wouldn't have wanted to stab people that were in the group that I was working with. So it really inspired me to look more into the concept of introducing structure into team decision making. And particularly what I'm interested in my PhD is the concept of silence and reducing silence using structure, yet still being psychologically safe to do so. So that's the research that I'm doing. Specifically, I'm looking at the contexts in which people find it acceptable to use structure for those purposes. So I actually just launched my last data collection study a couple of days ago. So all my data will be collected by this time next week, which is extremely exciting. And then I've given myself a timeline to have it finished and submitted by the end of the year. So hold me to that, Ken.
You know what, Samantha? I am on the same timeline.
Fantastic.
I'm looking to finish a DBA on human ingenuity. You mentioned, let's get back to our regularly scheduled program.
Don't worry about the schedule.
You mentioned the word silence. How do you mean? How does that play into decision making?
So when you've got a team sitting around making a decision and everybody has an opportunity to speak, but not everybody does. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. So the research has shown there's about 7 different types of silence. And the drivers behind that, I mean, it's the black box of the human brain, right? So there could be any number of drivers behind silence, but the consequence of silence is the same. It means that we don't have that person's piece of the puzzle to give us a full set of information from which to make a decision. So, group processes already are so susceptible to bias. So, we have groupthink, we have common knowledge effect. And then when you have a number of people in the group who, for whatever reason, don't contribute what's probably a very important piece of information, that it impacts the outcome of the decision. So I'm interested in that as a concept, and how can we make people, or how can we help people to feel comfortable to make that contribution. I think it's even more important when you're working with multifunctional teams where everybody has a very specific role to play. So it might be an executive team, a project team, but everyone is coming, someone's coming with a legal perspective, someone's coming with a HR perspective, someone's coming with a governance perspective. And if one of those people doesn't speak up or doesn't contribute when it comes to a decision, and then something happens down the line, like that can have really massive repercussions. So I'm really interested in how structure can help with that. And the research does show that structure can help with reducing silence. And there are some researchers that even talk about imposing structure to reduce silence, and the benefits that it can have on not only the experience that the team has in that discussion and that decision making, but the outcome as well. So I'm really fascinated to see where this last study goes. I'm looking at personality and all the sub factors of personality, and excuse me, psychological safety, and I'm also looking at an acceptability measure of a specific structured technique as well. So really fascinated to see what people say. And I'm asking them to not only give me acceptability in general about that tool, but I'm giving them 2 potential scenarios to use it in and asking them about acceptability. One is where their participation is optional, and the second one is where that participation is mandatory. So I'm really interested to see what happens here.
Samantha, when I listen to you describe this, there was a point in time, and I went to business school my first 2 times a long time ago now. There was a notion of make a decision, be proud of the fact you made a decision. Okay, I get it. It's a lot better than not making one. And I also buy into, as I've told people before, the decision not to make a decision is a decision in and of
Correct.
itself. So
Absolutely.
I get that. But, and I think we're on the same wavelength here, making a lousy decision is not a great decision. And too many of the processes that we have in business today that we practice set us up for just garbage out.
Totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. And look, I think there's a lot of reasons for it. And one of them comes down to, and I know you're big on this, is that the use of data, wanting data, and the dismissal of intuition. Alternatively, it could be the over-reliance on intuition when it's not warranted, and the not seeking of data. So it's like that interplay between the two. So you absolutely need data to understand a situation more, but that data alone isn't enough to make a decision. And I think making a decision in an area which you don't have a full set of information, like that's not good. So on the other end of the spectrum, continually seeking, we need more information. We need more, like there's got to draw a line somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think what that comes back to is risk appetite.
Yes, risk appetite on one end. On the other, as you said, it's involvement, or what we do is in our ingenuity game is an empathy catalyst. We start by taking people outside of their decision to learn how to empathize with different roles in a different company. And then we bring them back in to their decision so that they understand that, 1, their voice counts, and 2, we need to learn how to incorporate those voices.
Yeah, nice. So it's almost like you're removing the blinders to help people picture themselves in a different situation unconsciously. So they don't actually realize that they're thinking about the same thing in a different context, and then you can bring them back to their own context. I love that, Ken. That's great.
Yeah. To me, it comes up to another word you mentioned. We've never been taught to remove bias. We've never created structures to remove bias. And we can please talk about bias, but I mention that because taking ourselves outside of a normal situation, to me, is one of the first steps in learning to remove bias from a decision.
Absolutely. It's not that we're not trying to be bad. There's nothing negative about doing that, right? having that bias is totally natural. It's totally normal. We all have it. And it's just a function of the way our brains work. Our brains are functioned to want to make decisions quickly. And so, our brains take the position that our view of the world is the view of the world, and this is how it is. And it's just totally normal. It's natural. And I think the trick is to have the structures and the processes and the techniques in place to help bring you out of that, because it is normal and it is natural. You do know you have it. So do you know what? Just acknowledge it, own it. Do you know what? I really feel like I've got a bias in this position. Is there something that we can do to try and bring everyone out of their own headspace and their own mindset to bring us into a different environment so that we can see things differently? And I think I've actually never been in a meeting anywhere with any group where anyone has ever said that. Yet the reality is that every one of those meetings that I've ever been in, this will be the case, which is fascinating. Everyone knows it. Everyone does it. We don't do anything about it.
And I'll share this too, then I want to ask some more direct questions on your research, but it's hard to make a good decision internally because of the extreme bias. It's hard to use consultants because best practices from the last 20 to 30 years applied to innovation seems like an oxymoron in and of itself. What we've done to remove bias is we've created these challenges in working with the University of Toronto, students, faculty, professionals. Basically, companies are coming to these groups, and we just ran one with 70 groups to create like a control group of their own. So we have our internal decisions, and we have our, and our decision making maybe when we use an external, but consultant. But now we've completely moved them and say, this is as close to bias free as we think we can give you.
Yeah, almost like a think tank.
It is. And again, the process itself, I don't claim to be unique, but understanding the decision making from fully biased to best practice to as close to bias free seems to be, it's fascinating me.
Yeah, and I think the other layer that happens internally is it's not just the decision itself. There are so many things that surround it. So there's what's happening from a political perspective inside the organization. It's what is happening for the individuals in the room. Are they under stress when they're trying to make this decision? Because a stressed brain doesn't make decisions the same way as a not stressed brain. So there are so many layers to what we've got in here. And that's one of the reasons that that Suzanne Lebetillier and I built Ambiguity Apocalypse, that the game to help people experience what's it like when I try to make decisions under stress. And so we artificially put them into a stressful situation that everybody in the group is on an even playing field. Nobody has ever experienced this before, and nobody has an advantage. So people have an opportunity to actually be conscious of how are they feeling? What is this doing to their ability to make decisions? And they are having to make pretty hard decisions so that they can actually start to develop some self-awareness of actually how do I make decisions under pressure, whilst also learning some techniques to reduce that stress and that pressure, and to also help them to make better choices. So to help them to feel more comfortable in that situation. So I love what you're doing with that idea to try and remove the bias as much as possible. However much as possible to do that when you've still got humans, because everyone brings their own mindset. But it's certainly, I absolutely love that. That's fantastic.
I really love what you just said about managing environment and managing the human reaction or emotion to the decision. That to me is maybe not ultimately unique, but the way you're applying it within the game that you developed with Suzanne, I think is a very unique approach. What kind of decisions then are you working on with these people in this way?
In the game?
Yeah.
Oh, well, so picture yourself in a zombie apocalypse. The kind of decisions you're going to have to make there. So you come across a zombie horde, someone in the team has to sacrifice themselves in order to save the rest of the group. So the team has 30 seconds to pick who's going to die. You have to be able to select resources to give up. So you've got to make the decision based on the resources you have with you. Do we give up the water? Do we give up the weapons? Like, we've got to give up something. So what are we going to give up?
Mm-hmm.
And so we also test reactions and responses to unexpected things. So, for example, in every team has a card that allows them to do a raid of another team's resources. So the team is instructed to go and steal the 3 highest rating points resources from another team, but the other team doesn't know it's coming. So that whole, we know, what are you doing? We need that water to survive, or we need those weapons, or we need that car. And just seeing how they actually react to that unexpected thing. So there's lots of decisions that we try to put the team through. Some of them are harder than others. So, we can't have every single one be difficult, because otherwise they'd just be living in like continual stress for the whole length of the game. But what we find as we move through the game, and we generally play the game twice, one just to get the lay of the land of how the game works. And the second time we play it, we actually give them a pack of skills that they can practice to help them reduce their stress as they're making decisions, so that they actually have an opportunity to see, I've had this really stressful version of this. I can actually see how by applying these skills and practicing these skills, my stress levels are going down. And
Hmm.
some of these techniques that are in here are absolutely fabulous. So, for example, one of them is a simple box breathing. Super, super simple, doesn't take very long. And I actually did this with my mum a few weeks ago. I was at her place and her blood pressure was really high. And I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna have to call the ambulance. This is going to be terrible. So I thought, Mum, just sit there for a minute and let's do some box breathing. I think it took 3 minutes and her blood pressure went from like 205 down to 135. So
Hmm.
doing these things, like, it's not hokey. It can literally save lives doing simple things like this. And if you can imagine what that does to your blood pressure, what does that do to your stress response when you're trying to make a decision? Like, you totally move out of that, that stress response into the, oh, okay, well, actually, I am going to think about consequences now. I'm going to think about outcomes and I'm going to make a better decision. So it's not just about making the best decision possible. It's about trying to put yourself in a position where you can make the best decision that you can. And I think there's a difference between those two things.
So, what makes a better decision then? We're talking about making better decisions. What makes a better decision?
It depends. That's always the answer, Ken. It depends. I think it depends on, there are so many different variables to answer that question on what the decision is. I mean, for one person, a better decision could be one that I feel more confident about. For someone else, a better decision could be the one that makes me more money. For someone else, a better decision could be the one that's going to be better for the environment. So it really depends on the individual. So when I talked about risk appetite before, that's exactly what I mean. So what actually is it that I'm trying to get? What's my definition of success and performance? Because that will form the definition of what is a better decision look like. Because for what's a great decision for one organization could be a really crap decision for another one. So if there's one that's all about money and another one that's about environmental sustainability, not always, but there will be a difference in what a better decision looks like for those organizations. So I think it's being really clear and conscious about what actually you're trying to go for.
Do you approach this in trying to understand the decision at hand beforehand, if that makes any sense? And it's probably a hybrid, or do they discover what better decision making means to them as they go through it? Like, what's the balance there?
It depends. And I think it depends on the situation. Sometimes it happens organically. and you're kind of doing both at the same time. Other times it's an already identified problem. They go, oh, okay, yeah, we know we've got this problem here. This team this team over here, we want you to go and solve this problem. So from that point, that team will, do what they need to do. I'm a very big believer in front loading your effort to understand your problem properly. A very big believer. So doing whatever you can to get the best understanding of, what's happened, what are you trying to do? So really crafting a good problem statement that is specific with what it is that you're trying to, what you're trying to get. And I think a really well-crafted problem statement that everybody has contributed to is going to set you up for the best chances of success in getting a better decision. Whereas if it's happening organically and everyone's just kind of throwing in their 20 cents worth, you may not necessarily get a better decision. But, depending on what the decision is, depending on the environment, I mean, how high are the stakes that we're talking about? How many people are going to be impacted? How complex is it? I mean, we don't always have the luxury of being able to say, pause, let's go and, work on a big problem statement and go and run off and do research. We don't always have the time for that. Sometimes something's on fire and you just need to be able to do it. And I think that's really where your intuition comes in, and you're understanding what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with as an organization or as an individual.
Look, decision making is done by people. People are in organizations. They have to be open to it. So you talk a lot about culture, and you talk about decisive culture. So leave us with some insights into decisive culture, because you can't just go into an organization, tell the CEO everyone's got to make a better decision and the whole world changes.
Absolutely not. And so my view about decisive cultures is it's not any one person's role or responsibility or area of remit to try and make the culture decisive. If you want a decisive culture, there has to be alignment at all levels of the organization. So between the teams, between the leadership, and between the strategy, all of those have to have the right structure. There needs to be the people feel empowered. They understand and they connect with the strategy. They understand and they connect with the leadership team. They can see that there's alignment between what they're doing and where they're supposed to be going. People are engaged. People are safe. They're able to participate and they're able to perform and they're able to feel like that they can make decisions. And I think that, so one of the ways that I think about decisive cultures, which is one where people actually are making decisions and there is momentum, there is forward movement. So quite often what I see in organizations is, let's just wait until X. Let's go and just get this extra data on. Let's get this extra data on. Let's get this extra data on. So there's a lot of stasis, I think, waiting. And I think a decisive culture is one in which you have clarity on, on being able to move forward, even if it's a teeny tiny step at all levels of the organization. I think that they can be cultivated by, rather than thinking about the organization as this big thing or all of these little things, thinking about them in layers. And so when you think about them in layers, I think it helps to also promote longer term thinking. I don't know if you've seen the concept of pace layers from Stuart Brand. So in the Long Clock of Now from 1999, I recommend that you Google it. It is an absolutely fascinating way to look at systems. So it looks at systems as a series of layers that all function simultaneously. When I first heard about this concept by a really, really wonderful human, Professor Tim Castell from the University of Queensland, to be honest, it totally blew my mind. And I found myself thinking about it in so many different contexts. When you learn about a concept and then you start thinking about it everywhere and applying it to everything. I did the same thing. I did a course when I was doing my HR and industrial relations qualifications, learning about the application of metaphor to organizations and using metaphor as a problem-solving mechanism. Absolutely fascinating. So the pace layers, the way that they work, so it represents complex systems. So you've got these series of layers. On the outer layer, you have fashions, fads. So that's what's happening in social media, what's the thing right now, what's on Twitter, you know, doom scrolling, whatever you see there. So that's the outer layer. That innovates and it moves really, really fast. And the inner layer you have is slow moving and it stabilizes everything. And in Stuart's pace layers, that's nature. Moves very slowly, can be hard to change. But the whole thing is all about moving forward and continuity, and it works all together. And so I think there's about 8 layers in the pace layers. And so I use this framework to think about decisive cultures, the same thing. So the layers in this sense are that outer layer is the daily crisis. So what's the boss needs something, you know, there's something in the media, you've kind of got to scramble. So that's the stuff that keeps us distracted. But what really drives the organization at that slower stabilizing end is people. People can make or break the organization. Difficult to change, difficult to change. So for anyone who does anything in change management, you'll know that it's incredibly difficult. You know, the short-term crises at the top, and then you've got the slow stable at the bottom. So by thinking about and there's obviously layers in between. So by thinking about organizations in these layers, it means that you can add structure and order, and thinking about each of the layers, it means that you're able to make sure that when you're either making a decision or you're implementing something new, you're thinking at all of those layers, which means that if you're doing that and you're adding appropriate structure at each of those layers, then that's going to put you on the road to a more decisive culture. One thing I really want to say, Ken, is I don't think about structure as limiting. I think about structure as freeing. So structuring so that you can save the brain space for what's important, as opposed to trying to keep something in. So I think about structure quite differently than maybe some people. Wow. So that was it's a fascinating concept. So I really recommend you have a look at it and see, and you will look at it and start going, oh my God, I can apply this to this, and this. And I really love it. And the concept is if you anchor yourself and your focus to a deeper layer, the less stressed you'll be and the more you will be able to think longer term. So if your focus is on the daily crises, you're screwed. You're going to be stressed for the rest of your days if all you're thinking about is what's the latest thing that's gone wrong. If you're anchoring yourself to a deeper layer, like the people, then you're going to be able to be more forward thinking, longer term thinking. So, you know, like Richard Branson says, you know, if you get the things with the people right, the rest will come. It's a similar kind of concept.
Samantha Rush, it's been a pleasure. It's been quite a journey in 33 minutes. Decision making, bias,
all those fun
culture, structure. It's been wonderful. I look forward to keeping up with what you're doing, and all the best again with your professional practice and your dissertation. And yes, we can keep ourselves in check this year.
Absolutely. And all the best. All the best for your research too. It's a long-term game. It's certainly not a quick fix to do a PhD, but it's definitely worthwhile being able to really deep dive into a topic. So all the best for your research as well.
Thank you. And thank you again for being on Say Hi to the Future.
It's a pleasure.